Nice. Mary, you have your hand up there.
Yeah, one of the things that Tomas, you mentioned in a conversation we had at some stage was, and I think it's very pertinent to what Mags has just been saying there. You talked about the joy in research. And I know Jack has been speaking about this for a long time. We, as I'm talking about my NEARI group, original NEARI people, we found it in that new sense of identity. And I think this links back into your original statement about how do we move this along in schools? Because I think at the core of it is this sense of agency and identity that comes from researching and trying to enhance. Maybe you're doing everything really well and you just want to enhance it, or maybe you're not really meeting your values in your practice and you want to change that. But that sense of agency, that sense of identity is part of the joy of doing it. And then to go back to your first question again, and it relates to what Mag said too, there needs to be a second aspect, and that is a culture in the school. I mean, teachers at all levels are, I think in Ireland particularly, I can only speak for here and the people I know, they're very research aware, they're very research informed, but there's a need to move on to research active. And I think that will come from a sense of agency and identity being strengthened, a belief that this can happen, and a culture in a school that nourishes that. And that all feeds in to that joy that we experience, this idea that you can generate your own theory of your personal, professional theory of teaching and learning. And at the core of all this is to benefit the children, and of course to enhance society. It's a huge big question, and I'm oversimplifying it, but this is the nightmare for anybody when somebody asks a question and it turns into a speech.
Well, I'm guilty of that too, Mary.
You don't mind talking about joy for a minute.
We're all sinners here now on that score, I suppose, to be clear. What reminded me, what came into my head as you were speaking is it was on the On Being podcast, a woman called Angel Kyoto Williams. I think she's a Zen monk. Made this very unusual statement, a very ear-catching statement. Love is space, is what she said. Love is space. So when you were talking there about nurturing in schools and classrooms, this sense of agency and that would in turn foster the sense of joy. I thought that's about space and time. But I think this has in real hardcore IR context quite practical implications, because I think there is a piece around the space and time that we must carve out for the kind of stuff that Bernadette was referring to earlier on in her question about how do we, the enhancement of the connection research policy and practice, how do we build on the progress already made? And no matter how you slice and dice this, there is some point at which we have to say, okay, there's space and time needed for this at almost every level of the system. Now, how that might actually feel and look in real exciting, vivid ways, that's a whole other question. But we need to be honest with ourselves, I think, and that this will require space and time. And of course, invariably, I think in most walks of life, we'll all say we're very busy, and with great truth to that. And there's sometimes people ask, sometimes I'm far too busy to do that. I don't think I've never met a person who said they're too busy to do something that they're really excited about. Someone comes to you with a proposition and they figure, Tomas or Mary or Jack, they'd be interested in this, and we'll go ask them. And maybe out the door with stuff in our lives, but because number one, because it's you asking, and number two, because it resonates with your sense of excitement and joy. Oh God, I'll do it. That cliche of, if you want something, don't ask a busy person type of thing. So I think that's that piece of actually really, again, that biomimicry thing earlier on, observing what does bring us joy, what does get us currently excited, and how might we therefore tap into that in terms of agency, of course, is not granted, it's unlocked. So it's not imposed, it's education to draw from within, obviously, the Latin roots, the word, and so on. So that's one thing I would say, that in terms of love and joy, but on a continuum, shall we say, that I think the space and time issue, which I said would have practical implications, already has. If you look at professional time and junior cycle reform, the Croke Park hours, I said, have a mixed reputation, but those were things where actually, when you strip away the some of the kind of negative perception around it, they were the state actually saying, for the first time in the case of the junior cycle, teachers' professional time really matters, and we will therefore carve out 40 minutes out of a full-time teaching contract specifically for professional time. That was a huge breakthrough, and you see it extended things like the Gaeltacht education policy and the guaranteed placement for teachers who qualify from the BHE on the Gaeilge. And the joy piece, of course, of what that comes from, and yes, and the problem of having all these conversations, Mary, and I do talk a lot, that invariably your thoughts catch up with you. Not always in a good way. But I always remember vividly, I think it was before he passed away, but Kieran Benson was speaking at the launch of the 40th anniversary of the Arts Education Report from the 70s. And he had that quote from John Coulihan about how joy is a word we don't use often enough in education. And it really hit me between the eyes, because John was always got to go to him, very vivacious man, great company, way to talk to teachers in schools and so on. So it shouldn't have surprised me. But I think why it did surprise was because such a high profile, high status academic, foundational textbooks written, education convention in the 90s, and all that stuff is very formal registers of language. And here was this wee gem from him. And of course, he was instrumental at the Arts and Education Initiative, the Creative Arts Partnership, and so on. So again, it shouldn't have been a surprise. But that simple statement of this 3-letter word is not used enough. So I made a vow to myself, with mixed degrees of success, that as far as I had influence on policy documents and the teaching council after that, I would try and find some way to get the word joy into them. And I think that comes back to the thing of engagement. I think that the research and the action research in particular could be so pivotal here, because it's that live sense of tapping to what you really love to do. What I think Mags talked about. We all want to be, we want to be our more authentic selves, to unlock our sense of agency. And we will make any space and time in the world for that if we feel it's within grasp, and if we feel we are accompanied on that journey. And I think that speaks very clearly to that sense of joy that we all can, viscerally attest to.
Nice, Tomas. I'm going to just ask Bernie and Jackie to offer their thoughts briefly, if you don't mind, and then we're going to move on for our next speaker. This has been fascinating, very interesting, and the comments in the chat, they're wonderful comments in the chat between Tomas and Mike. They're fantastic to read when you get a second. So, Jackie, would you like to share your thoughts, please? Thank you.
I just want to talk about time for a minute, and I know Michelle will deal with some of this, but in my experience, having implemented action research across a school system, the way it happens is when teachers have time and support and a supportive culture, and that requires budget lines called teacher action research, that gives them the time and the support to do it. And when that occurs, yeah, the joy is definitely there, and the agency, and the capacity to produce research in their own classrooms and develop their own living educational theories. It works beautifully, but it needs time, support, and headmaster engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Bernie.
Hi, Tomas. My question is in relation to critical reflection and dialogue, which I think are really essential elements of practitioner research. And I think it's now generally recognized too that they are important components of teacher professional learning at all stages of the continuum. But I suppose I have a concern that very often it is maybe just a box ticking exercise, or maybe just at a very superficial level. So I'm just wondering, how do we ensure that it is authentic and meaningful, done in a wholehearted way, as Dewey would suggest, and that it is sustainable, so that it really does achieve enhancement in a teacher's practice and consequently in the student's learning?
God almighty, there's about 4 or 5 different. I'll try to be brief because I'm conscious of time.
Most brief as you can.
Yeah, number one, the points that Jackie just made, I think in terms of the structural supports that build around all of that and follow. The second point I would make, and I could say a lot more, but I think, and we're following this internally in the department with some kind of similar exercises we're doing with colleagues in terms of embedding awareness and use of evidence across the department. it's critical over time, you come to Jackie's point, that people are reminded where they've come from in the critical reflection and dialogue space. Because I think it goes to the heart of your question, actually, Bernie, and I've heard it in different contexts. We would put our heart and soul into a certain event, a very innovative format to discuss maybe policy or research or whatever. And it's seen so often as a once-off, and cynicism creeps in that for the 5th time we come along to this event in an off-site location, but where is it going? Where is it coming from? So I think very often the cynicism and the tokenism you talk about that can arise in relation to critical reflection and dialogue comes to the sense of a one-off conversation might be good, it might be not so good, but actually where is it going for me in my context? So it takes concerted effort, come back to Jackie's point, to actually capture the evidence from each engagement, track it over time, and then succinctly at the outset of the next session, here's where we've come from, here's how and crucially, I've seen in teacher supply, and I will stop then, the conversation has moved on in the following ways. And here we are today, and we're not going to go back over that one necessarily, but we've clearly progressed the conversation, but you need the structural support that Jackie talked about, I think, to do some of that.
Thank you, Tomas. Thank you so much for those responses, everybody. And I'm very conscious of time, but thank you so much again for your time, Tomas. Very grateful.